Mm, mm, mm. Hi, welcome back to Gold Coast After Dark. This is Tuesday, July 13th, 2021, and we were just here yesterday, so there isn't a whole lot of news, although I've noticed that a couple of email have come in, so that's good. So somebody's watching the show. I haven't seen what they are yet, but I know they came in. And so if you've got more, keep them coming. Friday, friend of the show, Jimmy Page Turner, head of the marketing department for Boppadoo Records, Boppadoo Books, and head of correspondence for Gold Coast After Dark, will be here to answer your email in his own inimitable fashion. I have a quiet guest here, an observer today. There he is. This is Christmas Fish. He belonged to my dog Boogie, and as you can see, he's needed some surgical repair, but he was a faithful toy for the duration. So he's here today. His participation probably won't be much. You've probably seen it. He'll probably show up again in time to say goodbye. Now, uh, it's a gray and dismal day here in Northern Europe. I was out on my bike earlier on today, which is why my hair looks the way it does, dull and listless, instead of its usual natural wavy and bouncy. But there we are. What can I say? Um, so only one quick thing. Like I said, it's the emails. They'll be covered Friday. This reminder for people who are wondering what the whole point of this is. These are actually what you are participating in is sort of a time capsule for my grandson Jax. His name is Jax Rummel. Lives in Texas right now. He's about a year and a half old. Uh, the times and conditions being what they are, chances are he and I will not meet in person, in the flesh, as I say. So I'm trying to make use of the technology here. So it's not a hard sell for my books or anything. This is just doing what I think grandfathers are supposed to do, or at least what they used to do. So, other thing we want to get across on that line is, Jax, just so you know, I know your mother, when we're doing live video things, your mother keeps referring to me as your Grandpa Parker. Well, look, pal, we try to go over this, and you got to know, whenever you refer to me, you can just call me Ace. That grandpa stuff. You just say, well, what's Ace up to? And you can tune in and see. All right? Okay, pal. So, that said, we are on to, after Halloween, the next section, which is called Music on the Wind. We're just going to get down to business today, okay? So here we go. If you take the eastward path, is to glide down an avenue of trees, nearly a full kilometer long. It's about 6/10 of a mile. For much of the way, the uppermost branches of the trees on both sides of the path arch high overhead, never quite meeting, leaving a thin ribbon of sky to be seen. It's just like a blue line down the middle of all this green. The forest on either side is dense enough and the trees tall enough that you're protected from a fair amount of all but the hardest rain and from all of the wind. Now, the sound of even a mild breeze through the treetops, though, is akin to that of a passing freight train. I mean, it roars through there like you would not believe. Now, rolling through the avenue of trees, accompanied by the sound of my tires hissing over the wet leaves and the wind in the treetops, was always good for clearing out my head. It's rare that I consciously think about anything when I'm on my bike. Now, when I stop, maybe, but not while I'm in motion. My attention really is focused more on how the bike feels and how it's handling, and on the sights and sounds I happen to be passing through. You know, but in between here, nothing. There are people who will say that is my normal state. They are, of course, wrong, slander, and calumny. But you know, we're not going to get into that here. I will not descend to those depths. Now, in the Bill verse, which is, as we know, up here, all this, in the Bill verse, things are categorized as natural, normal, or interesting. Natural is, I think, self explanatory. A blue sky is natural. Normal is what we've become accustomed to. So, a blue sky crisscrossed with contrails from jumbo jets on their way to wherever is normal, but it's not natural. Interesting is the unexpected. It's what couldn't be foreseen. A blue sky with or without contrails, suddenly filled with flying saucers, would certainly meet the criteria of interesting. Uh, Also, hearing what sounded like a saxophone while pedaling through the avenue of trees, certainly unexpected and, yes, interesting. I would expect to hear a saxophone from a busker on the street in Amsterdam or in an underground subway station where there's tons of concrete and the sound will just reverberate up and down the line. Okay. Uh, but there were only three notes that were played. The third was sustained, and it was silent. Uh, but it was enough for me to stop and listen for more, which were soon in coming. There were four more notes, the second of which was sustained. Seven notes all told, but not a recognizable melody. Now, granted, my knowledge of music is far from encyclopedic, uh, especially when it comes to pieces favored by reed players in the woods. I know lots of stuff. I've listened to lots of music, and it's all up here. But this was entirely unexpected, new, and interesting. And outside my experience, it sounded like an alto saxophone, the jazz man's instrument. Now, rock and roll guys like Bobby Keys and Junior Walker, my favorites, they preferred the tenor. This sounded like an alto. Now, whoever had played was somewhere in the trees off to my right. I couldn't see them, and they'd stopped playing. Now, how far? This this sounds like one of those rhetorical things, a debate. How far does the sound of a saxophone carry through a forest in mid-October? Well, I don't know. Uh, when several minutes had passed in silence, though, I filed the moment in the interesting unexpected file and resumed my ride. The temperature had dropped a few degrees and the clouds had caught up with me, but there was still no rain. Even so, I knew I needed to be moving. At the end of the avenue of trees, isn't that a nice sound? The avenue of trees. Meet me in the avenue of trees. You can continue east toward the Vlardigan waterways, or you can turn right and head south back into town, which is what I did. This way skirts the edge of the forest for a kilometer or so, swinging slightly to the west before curving south once more. Now, less than a minute after turning south out of the avenue, there's a gate, a small gate, and a cattle guard. They're at the end of a path that leads back into the forest. Now, there's several of these entryways off this path, just off this pathway that I was riding on. But I'd yet to venture down any of them. That wasn't going to change on this day, but I decided that the following day, weather permitting, of course, I would take the first one I came across after the morning session on Boogie's Hill. Okay? First things first, take care of the music, then you can go exploring. It's the way it is, it's the way it's supposed to be. As it happened, it rained throughout the night and into the next afternoon, so it wasn't until around 3 o'clock that the rain let up enough to get the bike out. Now, my backpack wasn't waterproof, so my flute was going to stay behind, even though it has a nice case. Uh, I'd worked a bit on it this morning with that what's called the headpiece, and then just blowing into, trying to get some consistency and a good clean note. And I wanted to get in the habit of carrying it with me in my backpack every time I went out on my bike. But even so, to take it out in the elements, even if it never left its case, simply wouldn't do. Dedicated and irresponsible are two very different things. You got to take care of your instrument. Instrument comes first. It was misting as I skirted the base of Boogie's Hill. I'd passed no one on the way there, and it's a straight and unobstructed view from the hill to the far T junction, which is where you turn right to go down the avenue of trees. Okay, so it was clear that at least for this stretch, there's only one person silly enough to be out on a day like this. Now at the T, again, I turned to the east, gliding down into the avenue of trees. As far as I could see, the far end was obscured by mist. This stretch of the path also belonged to me, which I admit is how I liked it. Too often, the presence of others complicated things in unnecessary and occasionally unpleasant ways. Being from a foreign culture, I had no insight as to how the Dutch mind worked, how a Nederlander might respond in a given situation. Without being able to anticipate a reaction with any level of certainty, I felt giving someone as wide a berth as possible was the prudent thing to do when machines, whether they're motorized or otherwise, were involved. But for the time being, at least, this wasn't going to be a problem. Even though I slowed as I rolled through the area where I'd heard the saxophone the day before, I wasn't expecting to hear anything this time. I imagined the 100% humidity would play hell with the instruments, wouldn't read. Not that I know about such things, not with any certainty, but that's what came to mind. Whatever the reason, uh, and not overlooking the fact that the mysterious player may not have even been in the forest. Um, there was nothing to hear at that moment beyond the hiss of my tires over the asphalt and the sodden leaves. Now I reached the end of the avenue, and I followed the path to the right and soon pulled up at the first gate and cattle guard. The path from there runs due west. It's a straight line as far as the eye can see. Now in the distance, I could make out a little figure crossing the path from north to south. It wore a long coat that looked like it reached just below their knees, a floppy sort of hat, and they were carrying what may have been a suitcase, though it seemed a little too long and a little too narrow. Still, at that distance and with the poor visibility, I couldn't really be sure what I was seeing, but it might have been a saxophone case. Now, there was another gate and cattle guard about 100 meters further on. If I hurried, I might be able to take its path, which I assumed also ran due west, and intercept whoever I'd just seen heading south. Now, I assumed the next path ran due west only because the first one had. The second path however, was much narrower, and the branches of the trees on either side of it formed a true canopy, so that even on sunny days, I would imagine I wouldn't be able to see very far down it because no light was getting through. But the Dutch are very methodical people, very predictable in some ways. So I considered it a reasonably safe bet that it did indeed run straight and true east to west. Now, unlike the first path, which was asphalt, the second path was hard packed earth and pea gravel. Now, despite the recent rains, thanks to the density of the branches overhead, it was only damp. And as I said, they also blocked out most of the available light, such as it was. So I switched on the small battery powered lamp that's mounted on my handlebars. Safety first, kids. Gotta remember that. It may not be the coolest or hippest thing to have, but having a light source pays off. Okay? Uh, because I want to avoid unfortunate interactions with any dips or potholes. Now, for all I knew, this was nothing more than a cattle path and might be bisected by a creek or a ravine. Now, cows can manage such changes in terrain easily. Old guys speeding along on bicycles, not so well. So, for safety's sake, again, safety first, I would have to take my time. Now, the overall effect was not all that different from driving across an old covered bridge, mostly gloomy, and every so often, though, there'd be a little break in the canopy, which allowed a bit of daylight through. Um, Random drops of rain made it through somehow, working their way through the leaves. And a mental note was made the next time I got caught in the rain on this side of the forest, I would make a beeline for this path and wait it out under the canopy. Eventually, the trees on either side grew farther apart, and the protection of their leaves and branches diminished and finally ended. At no point had my path intersected with another. I pedaled on, thinking it had to be a north south path because at this late date it seemed inconceivable that anyone would wander through an essentially trackless forest when good, dependable paths were available. And yet, so far, there hadn't been another path. As it was still only misting, I decided to continue. Now, though long-range visibility was still poor, I could see well enough to increase my pace without any fear of being surprised by a sudden change of topography or the appearance of a cow out of the mist. Uh, which I got to tell you, that is a contest I would lose, and I know that. It's like running into a Pontiac. So, still, again, safety first. Always keep that in mind. Uh, Also, the space between the trees farther off on either side of the path had increased. So, if someone was approaching from the north or had already crossed the path and was heading south, just in the last couple of minutes, I should be able to see them. That's what I thought. When I did find a second path, I had to assume it was the one the mysterious traveler had been on. There was no way I could be absolutely sure, of course. Any sense of time and distance had been skewed by the poor visibility from the first gate and the safety induced slower pace upon entering the second gate. Like the first intersecting path, this one was made of asphalt. Now, there are no footprints to be seen, of course, and none of the leaves stuck to its surface appeared to have been disturbed. Everything looked natural. The mist was in the process of transitioning into rain, however, which guaranteed I would be soaked to the skin by the time I arrived home. Now, when I was a kid, some people were said to not have enough sense to come in out of the rain. Somehow, at least for a day, I had become one of those people. Over the next 10 days, from the 22nd to the 31st inclusive, 4 days were lost to weather and personal matters. 3 days fell on the weekend, which were the province of bicycle clubs, jogging clubs, walking clubs, and junior riders from the nearby equestrian center. And just like that, just like that, um, the month was gone. The 3 days I did return to Boogie's Hill were windy and on the chilly side, if not exactly cold. Even so, I didn't stay as long as I might have liked. I'd wiped down and packed away my flute on the 29th and decided to continue my daily practice sessions indoors until spring came back around. And look who's here, Mr. Dancing Jack of Hearts, which means that's as far as we're going today. So, tune in. I hope you enjoyed this little reading. Tune in next time for part 2 of After Halloween, which will be called All Souls Day, which is the 1st of November. Um, remember, send those emails in. Jimmy will be here Friday to answer them. From me, uh, your old pal BP, Christmas Fish, thanks for tuning in to Gold Coast After Dark. We'll catch you next time. Bye bye.